Mark Corrigan is a strange man, to say the least. Despite this, on multiple occasions, he's managed to hide his worrying personality defects for long enough to ensnare unsuspecting women and drain them of their self-worth like the vampiric soul-crushing worm he is. Part of what makes him so terrifying, though, is his relatability. A lot of Mark's very worst tendencies, whether you like it or not, exist within us to some extent. And one of these tendencies I want to explore today is his ability to, every single time, convince himself each one of these women could possibly be the one.
Maybe she's the one. She is the one. She's the one. She might be the one. The one. The one. The one. The one. 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 One.
The definitive one, who will somehow save him from himself through sheer existence. But who really is Mark's one? If he even has one at all. Who, in retrospect, was best suited to love and honour Mark as he loves and honours them in his own way? The early seasons would heavily imply Sophie, but obviously the way that turned out said otherwise. But the Mark and Sophie subplot was a pretty great example of liking someone less and less the more you get to know them. Whilst we were focused on Mark's feelings mostly, being the main character and all, I do think their feelings towards each other were more or less on the same page by the end. I mean, regarding Sophie, she had much more of an insight into who Mark really was earlier on. I think to some extent she figured out who he was before Mark figured out who she was. I mean, the unhinged shit he got into during those early seasons definitely makes you wonder what Sophie even saw in him in the first place. But the conversation they have at the end of Talking, I think just shows you they were in different places in their lives. I mean, yeah, Sophie was still doing the clubbing and the skiving off work and such, but ultimately she was ready to settle down and have a family. And whilst this is what Mark always seems to claim he wants, the level of commitment this takes is just too much for him, at least at this time. Whilst Mark was losing love for Sophie, if there ever was any at all, I think simply love wasn't really Sophie's priority. I mean, it's a tricky one. Hindsight is 50-50, and maybe if they were more communicative in their relationship, things would have been different. But, also probably not. What it really comes down to in the end is the big L word.
Lesbian?
There were many factors in the marry section of Mark's marry or not marry list. Fear of being alone, the idea of a quote-unquote conventional life with Sophie, being accepted by family members and friends, avoiding embarrassment, probably some sort of internal validation that he is able to make a relationship work without hiding in the gallery on the wedding day and forcing your best man to piss on the unsuspecting elderly guests below. But in the not marry column was just, he doesn't love her. Mark and Sophie were just a classic example of a workplace crush going a little too far. Straight after Mark jilted Sophie, however, he's introduced to Dobby. I think a lot of people would argue Dobby is Mark's definitive one. She's nerdy and weird just like him. I think what mainly changed for their relationship was not only Mark constantly doing things to
humiliate me, and then I just think, why don't you just...
Don't say fuck off.
Fuck off.
But Dobby herself changed over time. After JLB shut down and she found a group of IT misfits similar to her, her confidence grew and she became more of a social butterfly. Obviously Mark isn't anything close to a social butterfly, more of a misanthropic squid.
Just stay mute, Mark. You're a social freak. Remain in your compound.
But I also think he's the type of person to abhor social butterflies. He hates the one thing he can never become. And I think as this aspect of Dobby's character grew over time, Mark subconsciously started to dislike these parts of her. But also Dobby, she just grew as a person. She mentioned in series 9 she was beginning to resent her life. It was starting to feel mundane and too settled. Maybe if Dobby stayed the same as she was in series 5, her and Mark could have worked, but that's life. People change, and either you change together or you separate. At the end of Talking 2, Dobby definitely seemed like she was looking for a reason to get out, but to be fair to her, Mark gave her plenty of reasons. She probably had more of a part to play in their relationship failing than Sophie did in hers, with the excuses for not moving in and such, but I think all in all they just both grew apart, but Mark was still holding on till the end. It's difficult to come to a definitive conclusion from here on in, simply because, we had time with Sophie and Dobby. Whilst they seem like perfect matches for Mark at the beginning, over time the cracks began to show. People like Callie didn't quite have the time needed to see if her relationship with Mark would flourish, but her cutthroat nature and lack of sentimentality I think would have killed the relationship stone dead. Plus Mark would have got sick of the crystal skulls at some point. We have to keep in our minds the AI generated image that Mark probably always keeps in his. You know, a winter Sunday morning, roaring fire, Mark drinking an Earl Grey, reading the newspaper with his wife sitting in the armchair next to him, knitting a scarf or some shit. That's actually pretty good. Whilst he could have possibly had that with Sophie and decided to throw it away, I still think this simple, idyllic, mundane scenario is the image he sees whenever a woman pays him any attention. I think that's ultimately what he wants, and so his perfect woman should ideally want that too. Callie definitely isn't that type of person, but you know who might be? Mark's biggest fumble in life wasn't ruining his wedding and in effect Sophie's life. It wasn't getting his ex-wife pregnant or studying business studies instead of history. Walking out on Stephanie, sure, was the quote-unquote right thing to do, I guess, but from the brief glimpse we got of Stephanie, she was perfect for little Marcus. Although the main issue being Mark was in a relationship with Dobby at this time, you know, it frustrates me. Only reason I'm a little hesitant saying Stephanie is his one is the lack of time we got with her. As Mark even said,
Are you secretly weird? Have I just walked into a bear trap? People don't just disappear.
But also, she didn't get a lot of time to know him, and so, you know, chances are she would have walked out on him just like her husband did to her. Also, I just remembered, Mark didn't just fumble Stephanie. He did the worst thing he could have done in this situation.
Probably the worst thing I could do now would be to pick up my jacket, walk out without a word.
You don't have to. You don't have to do that. You can use your words. Doing to her exactly what she just said her ex-husband did to her is brutal. Mark's a piece of shit. He does not deserve anyone.
Open another bottle of wine, would you, Mark? I'd like to get a little more drunk.
See, for fuck's sake. Right, let's move on. I'm getting pissed off. With time being imperative to making a decision on Mark's potential the one, that cancels out people like the barista, who Mark definitely would have had a chance with, the angry stripper, who I unironically think would have been a fairly good match, Lucy, who to be fair, I think time was hardly the biggest issue in that scenario. Sally was definitely very into Mark, the main issue there being it would have been a relationship based off cheating, but I don't think Sally was really interested in a relationship at all. Don't really blame Mark for running away from that one. The last person we have to look at, of course, is April. April, even though she mainly exists in a season I don't like too much, I believe was the best match for Mark we've had so far. She's socially inept, intelligent and kind, which are qualities Mark has 1.5 of. The biggest downfall in that subplot was mainly the situation. Mark didn't really do anything too awful to push her away, the burying of Sophie probably coming the closest, but he was able to sort of push himself around her, admittedly because he was trying to woo her away from another man, but I do think her slight roguishness would have been good for Mark to grow as well. Whilst almost every relationship in Mark's life failed because of his own actions, it was really Jez who ruined this one for him. Who's to say if things would have worked out if Jez didn't send that text message from Angus's phone, but the kidnapping was definitely the nail in the coffin in that relationship. Although, looking back, if they did end up together, it would have been a relationship based off a complete lie. I mean, their first meeting would have been shown to be untrue at some point. If any of Mark's family or people he knew from uni were to meet April and reveal he went to Dartmouth Uni in the 90s and not 2004. But ultimately, the death of April and Mark's potential relationship does fall on the shoulders of Jez. Which brings us to our final, the one who's been there for Mark every step of the way, who, despite leeching off of Mark for their entire relationship, the disrespect, the manipulation, Mark has always been there for this person, and they are destined to be together forever. And of course I'm talking about Saz. Saz came into Mark's life when he needed her most, to show that after ruining his marriage and portraying himself as the villain in the eyes of his friends and family, he could stoop lower. And he does. Because of Saz. Nah, just kidding, April Fools. It might be cliche, but truly the one person Mark has had undeniable loyalty towards his entire life is Jeremy. They've both bailed each other out so many times for no reward, and each one of these instances are the most selfless acts they've ever partaken in. At Mark's birthday, after the wedding, after Jez's party, Jez has been there for Mark during his darkest moments, and vice versa. Jez is the sole reason Mark realised he didn't actually want to marry Sophie, and Whilst he couldn't save Mark from what he goes on to do, Jez is the one who gave Mark the ability to see he has got control over his life for this short moment. And I think Mark deep down knows this. He's far too sympathetic on Jez. It's one of the main reasons Jez has been able to live in the flat rent-free for as long as he has. Whilst sure, it's by no means a sexual relationship, Mark's relationship with Jez shows Mark can be selfless and caring towards another human being that isn't himself. If a true The One is meant to inspire hope, make you a better person, give you something to nurture, turn to for support, be honest with, and who knows you on a fundamental level, Jez is Mark's one. But yeah, love. See you later.